Indeed, it's time for tonight's main event. Now, a parliamentary committee has set out a memorandum outlining key aims to what they say is driving up standards in Parliament and to improve the culture and working practices and reform, for want of a better word, the Chamber's proceedings. But this could mean our very own Nigel Farage could be banned from his presenting gig here at GB News, and of course Lee Anderson. So should Nigel Farage be banned from presenting because he's an MP? Well, Will Kingston and Matthew Stadlen are going to have this out and debate this. So ding ding, folks. Seconds out. It's round one. Will, we'll let you take it away.
My argument is very simple, and it is not just because Nigel is wonderfully entertaining Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, 7 p.m. on GB News. Check it out. Got the plug in. It is because more communication from politicians is fundamentally a good thing. That means more accountability towards politicians is a good thing, but also more direct communication in the way that Nigel communicates is a good thing. We know that much of the mainstream media has an agenda. We know that they warp facts. We know that they have political objectives which they seek to distort what politicians say for their own ends. By giving Farage the ability to speak directly to the people, you know what his priorities are, you know what his policies are, you get to hold him to account in a more adequate way. We need to encourage more politicians to do this, not less.
I know Nigel personally a little bit because we're both presenters on LBC at the same time. I was always interested to talk to him. He was interested to talk to me because I'm someone who believes in understanding what those you very strongly disagree with think. I also think that he is an effective, a very effective actually broadcaster. I thought he was very good on the radio in many ways. I thought he was a very effective communicator on GB News. I'd happily go on his show and tackle him on his views. However, it's a very important principle of democracy, the separation of powers. So the separation, for example, of our legislative body from our judicial system. And it is also important to keep separate the so-called fourth estate, to not blur the lines between our politics, between our politicians and our journalism and our journalists. And I've been on, not Nigel's show, but I've been on Jacob Rees-Mogg's show, I've been on Lee Anderson's show, and I'm happy to do so while they exist because I think they need to be challenged and I think I can effectively challenge them. However, it is absurd that they are interviewing me rather than me or some other journalist interviewing them. They have a degree of power. They are elected representatives. The way to hold them to account is to get them on shows being interviewed, not having them interview others.
Well, number one, the separation of powers is a completely different concept and doesn't include the media. But the second point,
it's an analogy.
In that whole point there, I didn't hear a single harm of this, of what as a result of Nigel Farage hosting a show. I heard kind of some vague principles. I actually didn't hear what is actually wrong. What is the harm with doing this? It's very obvious what the benefits are. It's very obvious the idea of direct accountability. I can't see any real harm of this proposal.
In what way is he directly accountable? By having the power of his own show where he gets to interview other people. And by the way, this doesn't just go...
Answer Will's question.
I will answer the question because it blurs the line between journalism and politics. Journalists should be holding power and our elected representatives to account, not the other way round. And I would just say this as well. It doesn't, to my mind, extend just to reform UK MPs. Obviously not. David Lammy, someone I consider a friend of mine, someone I was also a presenter with or before on LBC, I don't believe he should have had his own radio show. So it absolutely has to be fair across the board.
Blurring the lines, again, is not a harm. And again, if you want to talk about blurring
why don't you think it's a harm?
Journalists have been blurring the lines with politics now for the last 20 to 30 years. I think the whole idea that we have these separate estates between media and politics is a furphy.
What?
But I just don't, again, I don't see where the problem is here. I really, really don't.
All right, well, take it out to the panel now. You let us know at home who you thought won that one. Renee?
Matthew, would you extend this to newspaper columns?
Arguably, but our newspapers operate in a different way in this country because they aren't regulated in the same way and to the same extent that our television and radio industries are. So, for example, a newspaper like The Times or The Guardian, whatever your choice of politics is, they're fully entitled to be political. TV stations are not supposed to be political, whether that's the BBC, Sky News, GB News, or whatever else. GB News is definitely blurring those lines, but so far, Ofcom has said go ahead.
TV stations are not meant to be political. I thought only the BBC I thought only the BBC was not meant to be
that's
political.
a misunderstanding of the rules. ITV are bound by the same rules, as is GB News.
Well,
although in the case of GB News, it's a bit blurred because there's a question as to whether it's a news channel or not.
So is Channel 4 News.
Indeed.
And Michael Crick, who sometimes comes on this channel, who was, as you well know, involved with Channel 4 News for many years, before that the BBC, he says himself that in the later years of his career at Channel 4, that they were incredibly biased, especially during Brexit and all these other
And I'll
things.
answer that very quickly. I think to some extent that's a fair point, and you've represented what Michael has to say. He's entitled to that view. My instinct would be, but I didn't watch a huge amount of Channel 4 News, that it was probably gently left-leaning. Hugely biased? I don't think that's fair. But the point I'm making is this has to be rigorously fair. This isn't just about Farage or Lee Anderson. It's also about David Lammy. I mean, why should Angela Rayner, for example, the Deputy Prime Minister, I don't know whether she would be given an opportunity on LBC, I think she has in the past, why should she be given a radio show, even as a stand-in? She's a Deputy Prime Minister. We should be holding her to account, not giving her that power.
But you hold her to account
by voting.
You hold her to account by voting, but also you hold her to account by listening to her each week. Can I make one broader point? And that is politics has been so dumbed down. Politics and policy ideas are not discussed in the way they once were. We should celebrate politicians getting out in public and having discussions, having debates, having conversations, and not hiding away.
I think you're mixing two things there.
Let's let Eunice
No,
come
I
in.
just
Sorry,
think
Matthew.
more exposure by politicians is a good thing, not a bad thing. The more we know what a politician thinks, the more we get them exposed.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Exactly, and I think there's no harm having politicians having their own program because they will expose themselves over time, whether they're being interviewed
Hopefully
or whether
not
they're...
literally.
And I don't think it's a bad thing. And I was reading about this other thing that, Nigel Farage earns so much money from GB News. I guess what's the problem with that? I don't have any problem with politicians being rich. And as a matter of fact, I feel like career politicians that hide or actually end up being more corrupt than the ones that expose themselves. I think it's a good thing to have more exposure for politicians.
While the law is that Nigel Farage can have his own television show, not only do I have no interest in how much he earns, but good luck to him if he earns a lot of money. That's fine. I'm saying that it is an absurd position where someone like me would go on Nigel's show and be interviewed by someone who is an MP. It should be the other way. It should be. I can, and that's why I do it. But it should be the other way around.
OK, so Matthew, let me ask you this very simple question then. You appear on Nigel's show, right? Mm-hmm. Nigel is only ever...
Well, I haven't actually been asked on his show, but I would go on it if I were asked.
On it, fine. Well, when you appear on this channel, then, in particular, and everyone that I've seen on Nigel's show, there are left-leaning people on every night he's on air. He always hears them out. He always hears their side of the argument. He never offers a party line or anything like that. He is a professional.
He doesn't offer a party line. You don't think that his monologues are in sync with his party, which he leads, which is a UK party representing 4 million people?
Well, you could argue that about Carol Vorderman offering an opinion every 2 seconds.
She's not an MP.
To do that? No,
she's not an MP. There are wider questions to ask as to whether the business model of LBC, where I worked for 4 years, and GB News, whether the business models are appropriate or not. I happen to think that GB News has a very effective and successful formula. I also think that LBC has the same. It's a different one. And I think there may well be a space for it. Certainly while it exists, I will come on a right-wing channel, because I think you would call it a right-wing channel, and I would try to hold those on it. I would try to hold... Well, there's only one left-leaning person on this panel, and I would continue to come on it to challenge... Yes, you have, and that's why I come on it, to challenge ideas and to hold to account. I just don't think it's right for politicians to be trying to hold journalists to account. It should be the other way around.
Okie dokie, we'll leave that one there. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Will.